To me, She-Hulk never quite juggles being these two different things well. It feels overstuffed, like it's aiming for two very different results with just one story. Welcome back, MCU fans. It is time to discuss episode 7 of She-Hulk Attorney at Law, as we do every week, gathering right here to talk all the episodes and all the spoilers. And once more, we have a self-isolated story where Jen is dealing with unexpected rejection and finds herself thrust back into the life of Emil Blonsky as she visits him in his wellness center, meets new people that she honestly feels rather comfortable with, and begins to connect with her inner She-Hulk. And let me say this. While this is one of the best episodes of the series thus far, it is still riddled with so many of the issues that to me undermine this series' potential. Because when it's focusing on the character of Jen, there are just so many compelling ideas and character traits, and the way her character is slowly, at a very inconsistent pace, progressing, I find myself deeply connecting to, and in this episode, perhaps more than any other. But what the story is leaving along its way, the breadcrumbs that is spreading around, and it's simply not picking back up on them, we're 2 episodes from the end of the series, and I just don't see any potential for this to come full circle and to feel gratifying. That's what I'm ultimately lacking in this series, is gratification, be it instant or delayed. And this episode certainly isn't as fillery as last week's. We have one storyline that directly connects to a connection Jan made last week and this relationship she started with Josh, whom she met at the wedding. And as soon as they sleep together, the dude just ghosts her, which is just something you don't do. Don't be an asshole. And yet he's still going to do something worse, as we find out in the end. This is when Jen is called upon to meet with Emil Blonsky's parole officer and meet him at his wellness retreat. She finds herself breaking down her emotional walls once more, meeting all these supers who are dealing with their own issues, have come to accept their vulnerabilities and insecurities. And once we got the story going, after Jen's car gets wrecked and she's searching for a Wi-Fi signal while still obsessed with getting a text from Josh and stumbles upon the group therapy scene, I was fully engaged into this episode. I thought it was delightful, with one focused storyline on Jen's journey of self-acceptance as she meets one of the guys from the wrecking crew. Her anger is exposed and she finally is convinced by herself and by the people around her who show vulnerability, the vulnerability she needs to show, that it's okay to not be perfect. It's okay to have insecurities. And it's this working through her insecurities, not only that she accepts herself, but finds herself brave enough to share with others. And it's such a sweet episode. There are so many sweet lines of dialogue, and Tatiana Maslany's performance in here is easily her best work in this entire show. Or there's so many little nuances to her performance, like when she's in She-Hulk before she breaks down and sits there and talks to the others as Jen, how she's talking about how she is treated because she is She-Hulk, and she can't even look at any one of them in the eyes. And that is so compelling, it is so relatable, and is so identifiable. When you're vulnerable, you can't look at people in the eye. That's a real thing, and I really like how this show captured that. And the final scene in this episode, where we find out Josh's true intentions, who he really is, and why he was interested in Jen, which is heartbreaking, is a great cap-off to the story being told here, but it also ties in storylines A and B from last week, and it shows that the show can really work when it is a progressive, overarching narrative. With that said, I have a big issue with this episode and how it once again plants seeds that it doesn't pay off, where we have the return of one of the members of the wrecking crew and a quick confrontation between him and Jen, And not once through this conversation and how they become vulnerable to one another, he's on this journey of self-growth and improvement, and he never takes ownership in regards to who sent him. He never discloses that information to Jen in this journey of becoming a better person, and Jen doesn't for a second ask why they went after her. Now, Jen doesn't know of a boss. That line was spoken when they were already in the van. She wasn't present in the room, but she still saw that they tried to take her blood with a massive syringe. That question doesn't come up in that conversation. I just was completely irked by the fact that these two characters were getting so much progress in their own arcs and were displaying great emotional vulnerability and nuance as they listened to one another, and yet this obvious question, pivotal to the progression of the narrative and to She-Hulk's own growth through her series, and that never comes up. It's just one quick line of dialogue that could have taken many forms. It can seem very nitpicky, but to me, that would have changed the connection of this episode to the entire series as a whole. And that only hurts because while this show touts itself as just being a sitcom, it also has an overarching narrative. Every episode plants seeds that only every now and then some of them get picked up and paid off. And that is extremely dissatisfying, and it leaves so many plot points left hanging dry. I wouldn't be clamoring for an overarching narrative if the series was purely 100% episodic, but the series has consistently been setting up story threads, and it is very selective in which ones matter and which ones don't, which continuously is my biggest issue with this show, as it jumps back and forth between episodic, isolated stories which have their place, and then goes back to following a continuous narrative. And the pacing feels all over the place because of that. To me, She-Hulk never quite juggles being these two different things well. It feels overstuffed, like it's aiming for two very different results with just one story. The parts can be fun for sure. Episodic misadventures are delightful, even if light in substance and significance, but together they create for this distorted identity for the series, and so the parts definitely feel better than the whole, or at least more consistent. Quick, before we dive into my final thoughts on this week's She-Hulk Attorney at Law, I need you to start the conversation about it in the comments below. Let me know what you make of the series thus far. Is this one of your favorite episodes, one of your least favorite episodes, and how do you rank all the episodes thus far? Anything and everything down there. And if you enjoy these weekly She-Hulk reviews, if you enjoy anything MCU, or if you just love movies and TV, this is the place to be, so consider clicking that subscribe button and you won't miss any future conversations on your favorite movies and TV. Outside that massive gap of not addressing the elephant in the wrecking crew room, I found this week's She-Hulk to be quite sweet and a delightful step in Jen's journey of self-acceptance, with proper focus on her insecurities as she finally is able to accept them and admit them for herself and share them with others. It's a real shame that it doesn't push the story forward besides some connective tissue to last week's episode at the very end. And it really stood out to me because that conversation with a wrecking crew guy would have been so organic if it had happened, and it would have naturally fed into the character themes and the narrative. The setup is there, the pieces are there, we just need now to pay them off, to collage these pieces for the puzzle to make sense. Episode 7 of She-Hulk is genuinely heartwarming and wonderfully directed, as it offers the most introspective focus on the compelling Jen and She-Hulk duality. But it hurts that once more the main story is pushed to the side, and only because Jen, for some reason, never asks one pivotal question that would have tied it all together. Also, Josh, that dude sucks. Only 2 more episodes left. let's hope they tie it all together in a satisfying manner. And that is my take on this week's episode of She-Hulk. Let me know what you make of it in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, for joining me every week. If you do, or if you just found me now, there's a playlist for you to check out all the previous She-Hulk reviews. Thank you so much once more. Big thanks to my channel members for always supporting the channel, and I'll be back very soon. So until the next one, love each other and love the movies.